we'll leave a clap. There it is. All right. Okay. Welcome everybody. I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of introduction that Russ usually does beforehand. Actually, let me shut a couple of these doors. And my name's Rob Oakey. I'm actually one of the owners and brokers of the company. So you'll hear a story periodically that you'll have 5 people sitting around a table. So it was myself, John, George, Gretchen, and a gentleman by the name of Jared Blank. But that was from the very beginning when we founded this company. And otherwise, I oversee kind of all of the compliance risk management for the company. And so that's why I'm here. I'm going to be talking to you about the REPC. This is a class that when I teach at Stringham, it takes 4 hours to teach this class, and we're going to do it in 2 hours. So that's going to be a very condensed version. But I promise you will learn things that we're going to talk about today that even if you've been in the business for a while, more than likely, you're not going to be aware of certain things that are here and that we're going to want to address with you. So with that being said, we're going to jump right in it. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to turn off the front of the lights here so you can see better on the screen, because otherwise it'll help a lot. So actually, let's first get the screen going.
If you get a screen share, they can see it on their computer.
Yep. Oh, that's right. So we won't even have to worry about.
You won't even have to worry about the
Won't have to
lights.
worry about that. So
They'll just see you on there.
that's right. They're going to see there. Okay. So now, can I get somebody unmute their mic? Make sure that they can tell me that they're able to see the screen.
Yeah, it looks great.
Okay, you're able to see the contract clearly?
Yeah,
I can see it too.
Okay, perfect. So then, okay, obviously you don't have to stand up. Perfect. So, yep. Okay. So the first part of this contract that we're going to talk about is that first paragraph dealing with earnest money. Now, we're going to actually spend about 15-20 minutes just on this first paragraph, and people may wonder, oh, sorry, before we get started, I need everybody to type in the chat, type your name and type your license number for Russ to make sure that we have a record of everybody that has attended. So please make sure you do that in the chat so we can get that recorded. Okay. Then okay. So this first paragraph is talking about the earnest money. Now, why do you think when I'm saying we're going to talk about 15-20 minutes of this, why do you think it's important that we spend so much time focused on this small little paragraph? And this is definitely where I need to get some participation. Otherwise, this might be very dry. What was that? Okay.
Trial and error for a few years. Finally
Somebody hasn't muted themselves. So, okay. Well, the reason why that this is so important is because this is tied in with the division, and the division is very clear about wanting to protect the public's money. Well, the earnest money is the public's money. And so we have an obligation and a fiduciary duty to make sure that we are protecting the earnest money. So this first paragraph, it's talking about the amount of the earnest money and then how is it going to be received, whether it be a personal check, cashier's check, wire transfer. We're going to break that down. Well, this first paragraph talks about timelines in addition to the earnest money. And many times people think the timeline, there's only one timeline, because that first part where it says that the seller or the buyer agrees to deliver no later than 4 calendar days after acceptance this earnest money check. Okay, well, yes, it does say that, but it's broken up in 2 sections. It's talking about earnest money that will be delivered. It's going to be delivered to the brokerage within 4 calendar days after acceptance. And then once that happens, the earnest money must be deposited by the brokerage. So there's actually 2 timelines that the contract is talking about. And depending on what happens first, or sorry, it depends on when we actually get the earnest money delivered, will also tell us how much time we're talking about that is required for the earnest money. So let me break that down. Let's say that we write up an offer today and it goes under contract tomorrow. Today is a Tuesday, so we go under contract on a Wednesday. And at that point, the clock starts ticking according to the contract. So we go under contract tomorrow. Now we have 4 calendar days after tomorrow. So tomorrow's Wednesday. So that day 1 is Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So by Sunday, the earnest money must be delivered and to the company. Now, bear with me for a second. We actually have somebody physically joining now. So I've got to add one more thing live. So hold on a second. So we can go ahead and get this started.
Better on like a phone call when I came the first time.
Nope. And it'll be much easier to deliver this on a live format. Okay. Now I feel like I'm not talking to myself. So, so let me just bring back up to speed what I was talking about. And we go under contract tomorrow. So the contract says that 4 calendar days after acceptance, we must receive the earnest money. And I say we, either the brokerage or the agent must receive the earnest money check. Okay, so Wednesday, we went under contract. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. By Sunday, we must receive the earnest money. Now, the company is closed, obviously, on a Saturday and a Sunday. And in this case, this Friday is a holiday. So if you're intending to have your client bring in the earnest money, they must do that by Thursday. And we close at 5 o'clock. So if they come in at 5:01, we're obviously not going to get that deposited in time. If they come in at 4:30, we're not going to get it deposited in time either. But at least it's been received. So if they come in, they're going to drop the earnest money off on Thursday. Great. We've now received the earnest money. Okay. So if they bring the earnest money in on Thursday, that first timeline has now stopped. Remember, the first part says it agrees to deliver no later than 4 calendar days. Well, they did it after 1 calendar day. So once that first condition has been met, we now jump to the second condition, which is talking about after the earnest money has been received and the contract is accepted. So we come over to here. After acceptance of the REPC by the buyer and seller and receipt of the earnest money by the brokerage, then basically the brokerage shall have 4 calendar days to deposit the earnest money. So in our example, if the brokerage or the agent received the earnest money on Thursday, then the brokerage would have Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. By Monday, the brokerage must deposit the earnest money into the trust account. in order to protect your client. So let's test it a little bit. I want to make sure you understand the difference on the dates. So again, we write the offer today, it gets accepted tomorrow. And so the first clock starts ticking on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. By Sunday, we must have received the earnest money. So let's say that your client is unable to bring the earnest money to anybody until Saturday. Well, the office is closed on Saturday, so clearly bringing it into the office is not an option. That means they must deliver it to you somewhere. You either go pick it up, they deliver it to you. Whatever you do, you've got to grab the earnest money within that by Sunday, you've got to get the earnest money. So now you actually get it on Saturday. You physically receive it on Saturday. Okay, well, that first timeline has stopped. And now the second timeline starts. So now Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. By Wednesday, you must turn that earnest money check into the brokerage so we can deposit it. And the same thing, if you come and bring that to us at 4 o'clock on the 4th day, there's a good chance that we won't have time to get that deposited, because we start our deposits about 4:15, so we can have everything done by the close of business day. So do not wait to the last minute to get that earnest money deposited to the company, or else you're going to put your client at risk. One additional question, and just so you know, if you do have a question, do not use the chat box, because I'm not going to be looking at that. Please unmute yourself and just ask me online or through your microphone, because I'm not checking the chat line to see if anybody has a question. One more piece about this contract. Our older contracts we had, it's now been a lot longer, but it was about 8 to 10 years ago. The old contract specified that the earnest money was going to be deposited into the buyer's brokerage trust account. Well, that word buyer was left off, whether accidentally or intentionally, it was left off. I believe it was unintentional. But now it says just the broker's trust account. So that means that the earnest money could be deposited into our trust account, or if the other side is representing the seller, it could be deposited in the seller's trust account, and the buyer would be in compliance according to the contract. They would not be in default. But what if, and this happens where, let's just say we represent the seller and the other side represents the buyer, and their brokerage does not have a trust account, and so they just deposit the earnest money into a title company's trust account. Is that a problem? Guys, I've got to have some participation. This is not going to be beneficial if no one is participating.
I think that's okay.
I would say yes, because it has to be deposited in the brokerage. The brokerage has to have it.
So when you're saying yes, that is a problem. Is that what you're saying?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. That is correct. That is a problem, because I want you to think of it this way. We are drafting a contract that legally has to be in writing, so that's one thing. But the other part of it is requirements for two parties that they have to adhere to. And if they don't, then they're in default of the contract. So by depositing this, the contract makes it very clear, into the brokerage trust account. It does not say into any trust account in the world. And if it did, then it would be fine to deposit it into a title company. Or if it said into a brokerage trust account or a title company's trust account. If it had that language, then they could do that. But it doesn't specify it. And so if that other side did deposit the money into a trust account and did not deposit into a broker's trust account, their client will be in default of the contract. And we'll cover the section 16, which is the default section, in a little bit. But I want to make sure you guys understand that, because this first paragraph is not only a section that people do not understand. And when I brought up at the very beginning where the division is worried about this, protecting the public's money, this is one of the fastest ways for you to lose your license. One of the fiduciary duties that we have is reasonable care. And also another one is dealing with monies. We have an obligation to protect our clients' money. And if we don't do that, we run the risk of having a complaint issued against us and having a fine or whatever, to where the division could revoke our license. And we no longer have the ability to practice real estate. So this is a big deal. And so we need to make sure that we do our part. Now, if our buyer fails to deposit money, is it our fault? And I would say it depends. At the end of the day, this contract is between buyer and seller. So I'm not going to remove that responsibility from those two parties. But we also have a duty to help our client in certain things and reminding them. It's Aiden, right?
Yeah.
So we've got Aiden here, and he's going to be kind of my participant a lot of times. So if Aiden was my buyer, and we've got to get earnest money deposited. So again, let's use our first example. We go under contract on Thursday. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday, sorry, we went under contract Wednesday. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday is when I have to receive it. Hey, Aiden, congratulations. We went under contract. Let's just assume it's now Wednesday. Went under contract today. That's fantastic. Hey, just so you know, we've got to make arrangements to get the earnest money check from you. At least by Sunday, I have got to get the earnest money check from you. When are you able to either bring it into the office or bring it into me? Tomorrow. Okay, Thursday. Perfect. I'm glad you're able to do that. Great. Here's the address to our company, and go up to the 6th floor. They'll fill out the paperwork when you drop it off, but you got to make sure that you're in there before 4 o'clock, or else it'll be too late. And make sure that you do that, because we're going to be closed on Friday. So if you don't come in tomorrow, that's going to be a problem. Okay, great. So I have the conversation. Now let's say that Aiden doesn't make it tomorrow. He doesn't drop it off. I'm going to follow up with it. Hey, Aiden, I just want to confirm, were you able to drop off the earnest money yesterday? He was not able to do it. You didn't make it. Okay, so now that the office is closed, that's not an option. When's a good time that we can get together and actually have you deliver it?
I don't know when's a good.
Saturday's great for me.
Okay, I can make Saturday work.
Okay, Saturday, great. Saturday doesn't happen. Now we're at Sunday. We're on the last deadline here. Aiden, today is the deadline. I've got to get the earnest money check from you. If you don't bring that to me, you're going to be in default of the contract. Okay, and what that may mean. Right now, the contract says that you got $4,000 earnest money. Well, we're going to talk about section 16 in a little bit, and I'll explain this in more detail. But if you do not bring in that earnest money to me today, you will be in default of the contract. And at a bare minimum, that $4,000 would automatically be owed to the seller. So I need to make sure you understand, I need you to bring that check to me. Great, he brings me the check, no problem. If he doesn't bring the check, have I done anything wrong? The answer is no. I've done everything I could to make my client aware that that earnest money was due on that Sunday. Now, if it's not received, now let's just say he doesn't answer any of my phone calls anymore. Well, by this on Monday, I'm going to call the other agent and let them know, hey, just so you know, my client has not delivered the earnest money check to me, and I need to make you aware of that. I'm still trying to get it from him, and do that in writing. So you got a paper trail, because right now their client's in default. And we have an obligation to notify the other side. Aiden had a question. And speak up so they can hear you.
So, because there's electronic earnest money as well, is that instant or is there a gap?
That
Because,
is instant.
As far as I know, it's just like, hey, I submit it and that's all I need to do,
Yep.
but is there a gap from when you submit that, when it's in like? the
Okay, so
brokerage?
what the question is, we also have an electronic way of depositing earnest money. It's called through Earnest. And it is a ability to deposit the earnest money, and it is instantaneous. That still would have to occur within those first 4 calendar days. But yes, if they are unable to, let's just say they are a buyer from out of state, they can't mail it to us in time, they can't deliver it. So yes, Ernst is an option that they can use to deliver the earnest money, and they'll get immediate confirmation that they deposited the earnest money.
Okay.
So yes, that will work.
So that works for both of those timelines too, right? 'Cause they're delivering it and it pretty much instantly goes into the.
And it's
queue.
being deposited into our account
Okay. So that
so it-
has to be done then technically within 4.
within the first 4 calendar days after acceptance.
So-
Okay, so it still addresses that hurdle.
Okay, question for you, sorry. It's okay then for it to be deposited to title? Is that correct?
Only if there is an addendum that
Okay,
addresses this issue, earnest money to be deposited into a title company's trust account.
like I have a cash buyer right now that
Okay.
is from out of state, and so we're using the same title company, and she sent an addendum saying for it to be deposited to title. So that's okay because she wrote that addendum.
Okay. Did she do an addendum, basically just says earnest money to be held in ABC Title Company?
I
Or what addendum? There is an actual state
think,
approved title company addendum.
oh,
And if
okay,
you use that addendum, then the answer is yes.
okay, I'll have to look at it. I don't know for sure right now.
The
I'll
reason
have to pull
why
it up.
I'm making, so first off, one of the division requirements are, we're not attorneys for the most part. Some of you may be, I'm not, and the majority of us are not. So we're not able to create documents. If we end up doing that, we're practicing law without a license, which is another, obviously now we don't have that license ability. So we are able to, and required by our license, to use state approved forms whenever they're available. And then they give us a little bit of leeway to be able to draft addenda. Well, because there is a state approved title company addendum, that is what is required, because there's another piece of that addendum that is never discussed. In that addendum, it says buyer and seller are both aware that this earnest money, I mean, this is not, I'm just paraphrasing, it's something to this effect. But buyer and seller are aware that this earnest money is going to be held in a third-party title company, and that third-party title company may require additional written authorization to have that earnest money released back to any party. Because a title company is regulated not by the real estate division. It's regulated by the insurance commission. And they have their own requirements that they can put in play. This purchase of the REPC has language that says if a particular person is in default, well, then one side can release the earnest money without the need of any further written authorization. Well, if you deposit that earnest money into a title company, it's no longer a one-sided control. The title company may require both sides sign something to release that earnest money. And that's the reason why you got to use that actual title.
Yeah, she did. She used the deposit of earnest money with title insurance company addendum to real estate purchase.
Then
contract.
yes, your answer to the question is you're perfectly fine.
Perfect.
Okay, any other questions about that? I hope you understand this, and then I'll just end with this last piece of clarity. If your buyer does not bring in money, they're in default. If the money is brought in after their deadline, they're in default. If they give us the money, let's just say they gave us the money, they give us the check to deposit it on, so Aiden comes in, we go under contract on Wednesday, he does bring me the check on Saturday. He couldn't drop it in, but he brought me the check on Saturday. And I collect the check. So the brokerage has now received it. And then I forget to turn it into the brokerage to get deposited. Well, the contract is between buyer and seller. The buyer is now in default. Now I caused that default, but the buyer's in default. And the seller will have a, their remedy is through the buyer. And then the buyer could, of course, can file a malpractice suit against us if we have to, because we caused that, because the buyer did what they were supposed to do. We didn't. So just understand that this section is very, very, very important. Okay. All right. Like I said, it's been 20 minutes talking about that, about 3 lines, but it's critically important. All right, let's jump into next part. This contract right here now talks about, we're talking about the property included items. When we all went through real estate school, some of us more recent than others. But once we went through real estate school, we now became far more educated than the rest of the world. We're now much smarter than the rest of the world. And one of the words that we learned in real estate school dealt with our own version of the F word. What word am I talking about? Fixtures. We are now so smart because we have been trained on what a fixture is. And what is a fixture?
Attached to the property without losing its identity.
Okay, great translation. Anything that is attached to the property without losing its identity. Okay, so now that we have knowledge about what a fixture is, it's very clear on what should be included and what should be excluded. A fixture is also real property, right? Okay, so we've got this language here. It talks about included items unless excluded here within. You know, it's talking about plumbing, heating, air conditioning, fixtures, and equipment. Very important. Solar panels. That's a nice new addition that we added into it. So by the way, if you're working with a seller that is selling solar panels, if you did not exclude them from your offer and you're already under contract, I'm sorry to tell you that your solar panels are already included, and you're going to have there's going to be a problem that you're going to have to deal with, because those are put into the contract. But ovens, ranges, bathroom fixtures, mirrors, windows, a lot of information here that is talking about what a fixture is. Okay. Well, we are smart in the real estate industry, but then all of a sudden technology advanced faster than we as realtors advanced. We are so stuck on what a fixture is, we did not amend our definition of a fixture. And somewhere along the lines, flat screen TVs started getting mounted up above a fireplace, and it's attached to the wall. So when we're the seller, we know what a fixture is, and that television is or is not a fixture.
A mount. That's always the whole thing, is the mounts. The fixture.
Oh, come on, you're too advanced for a realtor. You represent the seller. Is that included or excluded? That television?
Yeah, I have that conversation with them.
You're not. Realtors are not that smart to think that far ahead.
That would be excluded, not included in that.
Okay, because you represent the seller, of course they're excluded, right? Of course
Right.
they're excluded. But the buyer that's walking through and saw the house that's made an offer on the property, it's attached. So is it included or excluded?
Well, he would probably want it included.
He would want it included. And he's got a fair argument. It's attached to the property. Well, because our older contracts didn't address items like that, and buyer's agent and seller's agent never addressed it, it became a huge problem. Wait a minute, it's attached. No, it's not attached. It's just back and forth. So this definition of fixture that we were so confident about created massive problems because we don't know. So thankfully, we added this newer contract, added some additional language that was not in our contracts before. All installed TV mounting brackets, all wall and ceiling mounting speakers affixed to the carpets. So the TV mounting bracket is attached, but not the TV. And you guys have it easy because whenever, I can't remember when this was adjusted, 4 or 5 years ago, that language was not there. And if it was not addressed in the contract before, those were huge fights. Those were big deals. So, but the wall and ceiling mounting speakers. So we used to have some, before we remodeled, exterior mounted speakers. If it's an in-wall mounted speaker, that one's pretty clear because if they take that now, there's holes in the wall. That was never an issue. But the ones that were mounted on the outside exposed, that are mounted, not just sitting on the floor, but something that's mounted back up in the corner of a ceiling or a wall, that's included. And so if that's not addressed, the seller needs to leave that behind unless it's addressed otherwise. What's also, there's also another little piece of technology that came out 5 or 6 years ago. It's okay, I already heard it. It's a round little function that when you walk past it, it tells a number and it lights up blue. A little Nest thermostat, right?
More importantly, you can take it off the wall.
You can take it off the wall, right? They're $249, and of course, everyone always gets the rebate, $100 off, so it's really $159. But that was the cool thing at the time, and so when you marketed the property, you had the Nest thermostat up there to show everybody, hey, how cool your house is because it's a smart home. And it went under contract, the thermostat was still there. And now that it's under contract and the seller no longer needs to market their home to see how cool it is, now they start taking things. Hey, wait a minute. All these smart light bulbs that cost me $20 a piece, I'm going to replace those with normal light bulbs. I'm going to replace this Nest thermostat with a basic thermostat because hey, I have the right to do that. Do I have the right to do that if I was the seller? Hopefully I've set it up. The answer is absolutely not. Let's read the first part of it. The sale includes the following items if presently owned and in place in the property: plumbing, heating, air conditioning fixtures, and equipment. You haven't figured it out? The Nest thermostat is part of the equipment. Okay, but now ovens, ranges, hood, dishwasher, ceilings, water. Believe it or not, I don't have light bulbs in here somewhere.
4 more words.
Fans, water, heaters, water, light fixtures, and bulbs. Okay, this has been in there for years because people used to take the light bulbs before they were smart light bulbs. When they were $1 a piece, people would take the light bulbs out with them. So they added this language in, but now it makes far more sense. The light bulbs that are in place, if it's a smart light bulb, that's the bulb that must remain, not just any basic light bulb. Okay. And then, garage door openers, fixed carpet speakers, mounting. Okay. The other thing that happens, and this is where it's become a little bit more challenging, which I'm sure our next contract will factor into these as well, is Vivint Smart Home, where now it's got video cameras, securities, the door locks, everything is attached to the Vivint system. Are those items included or excluded? It's unclear. So my advice to you would be, if you're the listing agent, get it addressed. If you're the buyer's agent, get it addressed that it's included or excluded in your offer. Okay?
If you don't say anything, it is included.
Well,
According to the very end of that paragraph. security system.
Well, but is that the security or the door locks? Yes. Is the camera? I mean, it's all tied to it. This is, trust me, I'm the one that's handling the phone calls, and I can say, yes, it seems pretty clear to me, but the other side that wants to take it with them, it's not clear to them. So get it addressed. Okay, because we can always, our job is to avoid litigation. And if buyer and sellers cannot come together, the only choice is mediation or litigation. Everyone said, I hear it 3 times a week. People are saying, I'm going to just contact my attorney after I talk to him. Okay, fine, go ahead and do it. Everyone has an attorney until they have to pay a bill. Then all of a sudden, wait a minute, I didn't have an attorney after all. Okay. Next part. Water services. We're gonna skip around and hit the high points. Water services, I'm gonna do this really quickly. If you have a seller that is selling a home and they also have certain water shares that are attached to the property, those water shares do not, unless it's a culinary system, it automatically transfers. But if they have like a private well and the seller has the right to keep those water shares after they sell a property, okay, that's fine. You need to find out if there are water shares, and if so, is the seller selling those with the home, or are they going to keep them separately? If a seller wants to keep them, then you better be mindful of this section, because if this section is left blank, then those water shares are part of the offer. So if you have a seller that wants to keep those 4 water shares, and I'm giving you an actual example that happened to one of our agents, the seller told that listing agent that they wanted to keep the 4 water shares, and each water share was valued at $2,500 a piece. They went under contract, and this section was left blank. The agent forgot about it. They went to closing, and the seller found out that the water shares were being transferred. Long story short, I think the total commission for the agent was supposed to be $12,000 to $13,000. It immediately went from 12 to 13 down to 2 to 3 because the seller was made whole again because of the agent's mistake. The seller made it very clear, I don't want to sell those. And the agent didn't do their job protecting it. So make sure you're aware of that. Okay, section 2. Filling out this section of the.
All right, quick question on that.
Yes.
I mean, I get what you're saying, like the agent made it right to the seller by doing that, but he also signed the contract, right? Like,
That part is correct.
I mean, it is on us to help them, and like, I think that was his bad or whatever, but they did also sign that. Like,
That is correct. And no question about it. The contract, what we said earlier, the contract is between buyer and seller. And there's the logical and practical way of managing the business. If the agent is in this for the short haul, or the company is in it for the short haul, then they want to run the risk of going to court, because what would happen is that, of course, the seller would have sued the agent for malpractice insurance. If there wasn't made amends, they would have tarnished their name. We would have had to go to court. And I mean, in this case, it was under 10 grand, so it would have been small claims court. But more than likely, whether we would have won or not in court, we would have lost. So
right. I mean, it's the right thing to do anyways, but
yes, legally, the contract was between buyer and seller, and that seller would have had to file a malpractice suit against us to try to make them whole for an issue that they felt was our fault. But that is true. So thank you for bringing that up.
I've got another question, I guess, I'm just on definition. So like, what is water shares a part of the property? Is like just based off of like verbiage, like when you sell like included and excluded items. Would water shares be like an excluded item already, or is that, part of your property? It could, it's.
Depends on where the
attached to it.
property is. If your house is in, well, certain cities, certain properties have their own water share, water rights. But in your middle of the city, so for example, my house, where I'm located in Highland, I've got culinary water. There's also irrigation water for the sprinklers. I don't have a separate water share right. So the water usage that I have, that is attached to the property. When I sell it, that water usage stays with the property. It's not a separate water right. But in Holiday, a friend of mine, their house, they actually had 2 water shares that they had as well. Just in Holiday, they had a creek that ran through the back of their house. Well, they had ownership of water usage.
Based on just when they bought that property, that was defined as this is their like separate, this is their water share. It's not.
The previous owner sold them with the house, so they acquired them. When they sold the house, they had a choice. They could keep those water shares and sell the property, or they could sell the property with the water shares. They chose to sell them with the waters, they sold the water shares with the property. So the answer is it depends. It can't. Okay. The purchase price, paragraph 2. Seems pretty simple, but you'd be amazed how many people mess up this section here. Okay, first part, if we're going to make an offer on a property, let's say that our offer is going to be $400,000. Okay, so we type $400,000 in that first line of section 2.1. Purchase price of the property is 400 grand. Okay, just keeping numbers simple. Let's say that our buyer wants to do a 90-10 loan. What does that mean?
He wants to borrow 90 and then he wants to contribute 10% of that.
Okay, so you are 100% correct, but what do you mean contribute 10% of that? What does that mean?
It means at closing, you got to come up with what, $40,000.
Okay, so their down payment is $40,000 in order, so they're going to borrow 90%. The lender is going to give them 90% of the loan, so $360,000, and they're going to put down their down payment is going to be $40,000. Okay, so we start, and let's say that our earnest money, again, just to keep numbers simple, earnest money is going to be $10,000. So in section 2.1A, we put what number? $10,000. Put $10,000 in paragraph A. In paragraph, we're going to say in B, we're going to say 0. There is no additional earnest money. In C, the new loan amount is what? It's the 90%, which was what?
360,000.
360. So 360 goes right there. Okay. Now we skip D. There is no seller financing. And now we come down to E. Balance of purchase price. What number goes in E?
30, right?
Okay. I've got 30. Sounds pretty good. Any other takers?
Would be 300 and is it minus the? Is just the.
Don't you have to
balance?
minus out the earnest?
So it's the purchase price minus the earnest money, so it'd be 300 and or we said 360.
Okay. So what number are you saying that goes right there?
60. If the total purchase price is 400,000 minus.
Didn't we say 360 went up here?
$30,000.
360 goes here. It goes here or there? Where does 360 go?
Loan amount.
The loan amount. So in line C. Okay.
E would be 30,000.
And I said it before, it sounds like a good number. I wasn't ever saying it was wrong. I'm just asking if other people had something else that need to go there. The answer is correct. $30,000 is what goes there. But many times people think that they forget to include the earnest money as part of that remaining 10%. So they end up putting $40,000 there. And if you just do the basic math, 40 plus 360 plus 10, I don't think that adds up to 400. So to this day, I still, before I get down to this, the bottom line of purchase price, I want to do my number. I want to just do the math. I will, once I do all that, I figure this in. Okay, how much is earnest money? Okay, how much are they doing a 90-10, 95-5, 80-20? I'll do the math. 80% or 90%. Okay, I'll put that number here. Okay, well then what's the difference? I put the number in E. Now I just add it up. Because it is possible that the numbers aren't as, what if the earnest money is $200? What if it's $3,500, $3,700? You know, the numbers aren't as easy as we've made it. So I will add up the numbers and make sure that that bottom number comes up to 400, because that's what I put up in the first line of paragraph 2.1. They should add up. So yes, the earnest money is deducted from the amount that you still have to bring in at closing as part of the 10%. So the $30,000 plus the 10 equals the $40,000, which is the 10% that they need. Okay? All clear? If it's quiet, I'm going to move on, assume that everyone understands. Okay, section 2.2. This is also very important, especially in today's market where they know that you're competing. I understand you are competing against cash offers, and you have a buyer that has made 15 offers on 15 different properties and they've never been accepted. And so you're now trying to think that you're smart and make the next offer not contingent upon a home selling when it is contingent upon a home selling. Let's read what that section says. Buyer's ability to purchase the property to obtain the loan referenced in 2.1C above, talking about the loan that they're going to borrow, and or any portion of the cash referenced in section 2.1E, any amount of the deposit, any of that 10%, is it coming from the house that you are selling? So reference in section 2.1 above is or is not conditioned upon the sale of real estate owned by the buyer. If checked in the affirmative, the terms of the attached subject to sale buyer's property addendum apply. That means if any of that 10% that you're using, or the loan amount, whatever, is going to be because you're having to sell a house, you must use the subject to sale addendum, period. And if you don't, you are committing fraud. I understand that that makes it very difficult for your buyer.
Gerard, I'm with Century 21.
And whoever that is, hit mute.
And I was just calling
Because
to
you're
let you
now-
know that our office just listed.
Hey, got the mic on over there.
Hello? They're answering a phone. Hit your mute button. So I understand that the situation is challenging for your buyer, but the contract makes it very clear. If they're in that situation, they must follow the term of the contract or they're committing fraud, plain and simple. Okay. Now, if they can find another way to do it, let's say that the buyer doesn't have to sell the house. They've got a 401k or they've got another resource that they can go, but they prefer to sell their house. Okay, well, it still says, how are they going to do it? You're going to have to get out the 401k. And if you're representing the seller in that case, I would also make sure that you get from the buyer something from the lender that indicates that they can qualify for two homes. They can qualify for the home that they're buying without selling their existing home. And if that's the case, then it's not subject to the home selling in most cases. Okay, hopefully that's clear. Okay, settlement and closing. Now, we're all guilty of using the language interchangeably and inaccurately. What is the difference between settlement and closing?
Settlement is signing paperwork and submitting everything. Closing is when things are fully signed and I guess confirmed, like the loan is secured and everything's
Okay.
like reviewed and confirmed.
Okay. You've got a good majority of it. Some things that are still, I mean, I understand where you're going, and basically, yes. Any other thoughts?
Well, also at closing, you're bringing your obligation to the table, all the money that you owe. And during settlement, you don't necessarily have to do that, but at closing, it is required. Is that right?
You started to say one thing so at settlement, there is some money that must come to the table, or I should say that most likely will be brought to the table. In our example, the $40,000 has to be brought to the table. Now, $10,000 is held in earnest money, so you may not physically bring that, but the remaining $30,000, you have to bring that to the title company in the form of a wire transfer to them. If it's more than $10,000, they're not going to take anything other than a wire, or I should say they'll do a cashier's check. But that's the money that has to be brought in. So that portion is part of settlement. The amount that's going to be borrowed or paid off by the lender, that is the part that would be done in order to close. So settlement, yes, it's where both parties come and they sign the paperwork that they're being asked to sign. And then they're also going to deliver to the title company any proceeds, any closing monies that are required by the REPC. So they sign it and they take care of that. Closing is basically when funding and recording occur. So yes, the review of information, because they're going to review all that before they actually record the documents with the county recorder's office. But specifically, funding and recording has happened. Once those happen, ownership transfers. So when we're dealing with repairs, this is important to make sure that you do. If you're asking a seller to do repairs, don't ever state that the repairs shall be done prior to closing. Always make sure you say prior to settlement, because you could go sign documents and the seller hasn't even started repairing the roof, and it's going to take a week to get the roof done. Well, if you sign today, the seller's not in default because they have to do it prior to closing. So you sign the paperwork because the contract says today is the settlement deadline, and the seller's not in default. There's nothing you can do. Then all of a sudden, once you sign, once it funds and records, now the seller's in default, but the transaction is now closed. So make sure you get those repairs done prior to settlement, because now if the repairs are not done, you're not going to, you can make a claim that the seller's in default because they haven't made the repairs. Therefore, you're not going to do any signing. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. Let's talk about section 4, prorations to special assessments, transfer fees. Everyone knows what a special assessment is, correct? Just in case, those
No.
are typical. Okay, so no, I heard a no, I think. A special assessment they're typically tied to HOAs. And that is where an HOA gets together and for whatever reason, they're trying to make some type of improvement in their subdivision. Let's hypothetically say that it's a new subdivision, and there's 100 units within that complex. Well, brand new, all of the homes are recently purchased, and everyone's loving everything. They've got this brand new home area, but they don't have, it's not gated, and the builder never put up any outside lighting. So it's dark in the complex. And what's happening is it's in an area that a lot of crime is occurring. And cars are being broken into for whatever. So the complex gets together and there's 100 units. So therefore each member of that unit is part of the association, and they decide to vote on making a gated community and outside lighting. And it's going to cost $500,000, $500,000 to get the lighting and the gates on both entrances of the complex. And it passes. 51% of the people say that they want it, and 49% of the people say that they don't want it. Well, 100% of the people now will be obligated to pay $5,000 of that $500,000 price tag. Every unit is going to be assessed a special assessment of $5,000, and they'll figure out that with that assessment, it'll say it needs to be paid this way, it needs to be paid that way, it needs to be paid by a certain time frame. And that's what a special assessment is. So of course, the person that's lived there the longest, now they're like, hey, I want to get out of here before I have to pay this $5,000 because I'm planning on moving anyway. I'm just going to bump it up a month. And the HOA has already approved that it's part of it, but the special assessment is not due for a year. So this guy's like, I'm out of here. Okay, the HOA has approved it. So if it says special assessment paid by seller, paid by buyer, in today's market, who is holding the cards? The seller or the buyer? Seller is holding the cards. So there's a good chance if you as a buyer, if you don't know what this is and you're like, okay, well, I'll check buyer, even though I don't know what it is, because I want to make my offer stronger. You did, you made your offer stronger, but now your buyer has a $5,000 expense that they're going to have to pay within a year's time because you didn't know what special assessment was. So your job would be, when you're getting information from the HOA, you need to ask, is there a special assessment that's due? Is there a special assessment that is being discussed that that goes up for vote in upcoming months? We're going to talk about seller's disclosures, and part of that are getting HOA minutes to find out any discussions. Well, that's what a special assessment is. If there's nothing, great, then it's not going to matter. The next piece is going to come down to your HOA fees and transfer fees. Because of the crash that we had back in 2007, 8, and 9, there are a lot of HOAs that got hammered from that because people went and let their houses go into default. And the first thing that they failed to pay was the HOA dues. And you got a bank that's going to foreclose on the property. The HOA wanted to foreclose on it as well, but they're not going to get ahead of the bank. So a lot of HOAs got into financial trouble. So because of that, now pretty much every HOA adds some type of transfer fee or change of ownership fee. Out at my heavens, by the district valley that's out there on 106th, east of the whole subdivision out there.
Murray West Valley.
No, I'm in my heavens. Somebody help me out by the Ochre Shadows. It's owned by the copper mine. The whole
Tooele?
no. Oh my heavens! I can't think of the whole Daybreak. My heavens! The whole Daybreak subdivision, if you didn't know, was developed by the copper mine. Okay, Daybreak, when you have a change of ownership there, theirs is a 0.5% of the purchase price. So if it's a $500,000 purchase price, you've got a $2,500 transfer fee to go ahead and get that taken care of. So it's important for you to know who's responsible for that transfer fee. Is it the seller? Is it the buyer? It's whatever you negotiate. Okay. Real quick on paragraph 5. When working with a buyer and or seller, it is required by the state when you work with them to establish something. What must you establish? And it starts with an A.
Agency.
Agency, that is correct. Agency must be established. So if we're working with the seller, how do we establish agency? A listing agreement is how we establish agency. And if we are working with a buyer, a buyer broker is how we establish agency. So part of the division requirement is you must establish agency before working with a client. So if it's required by the division, so that means it's required by the state, which is required for our licensure. If we must establish agency before we work with them, does that mean before we write an offer? Actually, before you do something in writing, you must establish agency. So hopefully I've answered this question, but before you write an offer, you must have agency established. So that means that before you write up an offer, you must have either before you're listing a property. That one's always easy. We typically get a listing contract before we list a property. But for some reason, when we represent a buyer, we forget to get a buyer broker signed, but we write up a contract and go under contract with them, and we don't have a buyer broker done. But then some agents think, well, yes, I took care of it because I disclosed here, Russ Orchard disclosed that I'm representing the buyer. So here is my agency agreement, and that is false. Paragraph 5 does not say agency agreement. It says confirmation of agency relationship. Buyer and seller acknowledge prior written receipt of agency disclosure provided by their respective agent that has disclosed the agency relationship confirmed below. So buyer and seller, you're acknowledging that the seller is represented by the agent in the brokerage. And in this case, the buyer is represented by Russ and the brokerage is Everest. They're acknowledging that has happened. Well, if they've never signed a buyer broker agreement, then that never happened. So we have an obligation to make sure that we're filling this out correctly. Right? Section 7. Okay. Seller's disclosure, section 7. I am still to this day shocked how often sellers are in default on their transactions. I'm under contract with I've got 2 buyers right now that are under contract with their sellers, and both of those listing agents who have been in the business for a while are in default. Sorry, their sellers are in default because they failed to follow this piece of the contract. Okay, if you're unaware, section 24 talks about deadlines. Section 24A has a seller disclosure deadline. That means that by this deadline, whatever is in place, whatever is stated there, the seller is obligated to provide everything in paragraph 7 to the buyer. Unfortunately, agents somehow think that the only thing that they are obligated to provide, they say seller's disclosures, which their interpretation only covers item number A. The seller's disclosure is what, that 7-page document that we hand to our seller to fill out. That's what agents think that's all that they have to provide to the buyer in order to meet the seller disclosure deadline. And that is so incorrect. The seller disclosures are all of these items, A through K. And the seller, again, not the listing agent, the seller is obligated to provide those to the buyer by the deadline. So here is a very common problem. In today's market, does it take long? If you have a listing, does it take long to get a home under contract if it's priced right? The answer is absolutely not. If I take the listing tonight, could I be under contract? Sorry, if I took the listing today, put it on the MLS, is it possible for me to be under the contract today? The answer is absolutely yes. It is possible to be under contract today. Okay, well, let's say that happened. I put the listing on the market today. We get 10 offers and we go under contract today. And in the offer that we accepted, the buyer's agent, which is not an unreasonable timeline, they say that the seller disclosure deadline is 3 days after acceptance. So if acceptance occurred today, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So on Friday, which we're going to also talk about exactly the time portion of the contract, the deadline will be 5 p.m. on Friday, is when the seller will be obligated to provide the seller's disclosures. Well, remember, Friday is a holiday first as well. So I'm excited. I got my listing. I'm feeling awesome. This is great. I'm guaranteed to get my first paycheck, and we go under contract tomorrow. I'm of course checking everything that I've got to do, and now I find out, I don't realize this, but I find out on so today's Tuesday, Wednesday. I find out on Thursday that I was supposed to choose a title company and notify the title company that we're now under contract. So I give the paperwork to the title company, and that's it. And Friday's a holiday, so their title company's closed. And then on Tuesday and Wednesday of next week, we get an email from the title company that we were using. They just send us the title commitment report out of the blue. We're like, oh, great. I didn't even ask for that. Thank you. Appreciate it. Well, I'm here to tell you that title commitment was part of the seller's disclosures, item C. That title commitment has got to be given to the buyer by the deadline, which we already knew is Friday at 5 p.m. And if you just took a listing today and you don't have the title commitment by now, before you put the listing on the MLS, there's a good chance you may not get that in time for your seller disclosure deadline. So your client's going to be in default if you don't understand this. Item B, if the home was built before 1978, so if it's 1977 or earlier, you must include a lead. Now, fortunately, the MLS has made this addition to you that it requires this to be uploaded based on entering 1977. So the MLS has helped you here to at least include the information, but you still got to provide that to the buyer. The title commitment. If you are part of an HOA, this is the part that never happens. The CC&Rs, the title company will look that up for you if they can and get it for you, but you got to provide the CC&Rs. You've got to provide a copy of the most recent minutes. It doesn't say all of the minutes. It says the most recent minutes, budget and financial statement for the HOA. If it's got any long-term leases or short-term leases, you got to provide those. If it's got any property management agreements, you got to provide that. So everything on this section, the seller must provide to the buyer. And I'm here to tell you, if if I'm the listing agent and I say, yeah, Aiden, hey, I've provided you the link, or just go look on daybreak.com and contact them and go pull the records yourself. No, it does. The contract doesn't say, it says seller's disclosure deadline. Seller shall provide to buyer the following documents in a hard copy or electronic format. That means a PDF or a hard copy. Not here. I'm going to give you the resource for you to go do the work and you to pull it off. Your client will be in default otherwise. Okay. And if there's $10,000 earnest money, that could be a big problem for your seller. Okay. Any questions about that? If not, we'll move on to the next part. Section 8. Now, we've heard Section 8 many times throughout our life, maybe tied to the military. That's somebody who gets out of the military for going, whatever, losing their mind or whatever, and they get discharged from the military. So maybe that's a bad thing in the military. I don't know. Never been in the military. But in real estate, in our contract, Section 8 is our get out of jail free card. It's our protection for our client. Okay. 8.1 talks about the due diligence. 8.2 talks about the appraisal, and 8.3 talks about financing. Now keep in mind, what we are talking about here is just the information that's on the contract. I'm not talking about anybody changing the terms of the contract by writing an addendum and they include non-refundable earnest money. But we're not talking about any of these outside scenarios that would alter the language that is stated in the contract. We're only talking about what the contract has in place. So 8.1 is talking about due diligence. But I will bring up this part. If you make an offer that waives your due diligence, so your first part, due diligence, buyer's obligation to purchase the property is or is not conditioned upon the buyer's due diligence. If you waive this, let's say that I waive this condition because I have a cash buyer and they want the property, they're gonna buy it right out of the gate. They waive due diligence. Or what I've seen more often is they are going to get a loan, but they're going to buy the house just regardless of due diligence. So they waive due diligence. Do they still have the right to do inspections on the property?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, why?
You can do whatever you want, I guess, but you can't, I guess, hold the transaction up because of that. Like if they find something, they already waived their due diligence, so they can't, like, I guess, negotiate that or like dispute it. But sure, they can do an inspection, so they have the knowledge of what's wrong with the house, but they can't be like, oh, well, we're gonna back out of the contract now because they waived their due diligence,
Okay.
as far as I know.
Well, the question is why are they able to do an inspection?
Because they can, like,
Why?
if they just want to know what's wrong with the property. Not necessarily, having that like protection, they want to know what's wrong with the property, and if something's wrong with it, then we can back out. It's just, we kind of just want to know what's wrong with the property.
Okay. Okay, so any other thoughts to that? Okay, well, how about I add a couple of thoughts? Okay, so this whole paragraph is talking about the buyer's right to do whatever inspection they feel that they want to do. Okay, they can check the neighborhoods, they can check foundation, they can check, from HOAs, they can check the HOAs, they can check municipal services, they can check convicted sex offender websites, they can check whatever they need to do to feel comfortable about purchasing the property. But let's read this last part. It says, okay, second to the bottom, the last line. Seller agrees to cooperate with the buyer's due diligence. Okay? Saying seller agrees, that's what gives you the right to go and do the inspection, because it says the seller agrees to cooperate. However, let's read the top part of the paragraph again. Buyer's obligation to purchase the property is not conditioned upon buyer's due diligence as defined in section 8.1 below. This condition is referred to as the due diligence condition. If checked in the affirmative, sections 8.1 through 8.c apply. Otherwise, they do not. So if it's checked in not, that means that this paragraph does not apply, which means the seller has no obligation to comply with what you're doing. If you got nothing out of what I just said all day today, the buyers that you have been you've been working with, and you've been writing offers that are not contingent upon due diligence, and you've thought that the buyer still has the right to an inspection. But if you got nothing out of anything today, hopefully you got that. Because that's what's happening in offers that are going on today. We are writing offers and we don't understand what we are directing our clients into. So how could I still make my offer contingent or not contingent upon this section, but still allow my client, my buyer, to have the right to inspections? What could I do? An addendum, okay?
Okay, this brings up a better question. So
Say the question, let's answer this one first. How could I solve that problem? Then I'll answer your question. Anybody?
I mean, would it be possible, would it be possible just to approach the seller and say, we now understand in the contract it is not contingent, but my buyer would appreciate the opportunity to just do a preliminary inspection. Would that be okay with you? Is that possible?
And how's a way to do that?
in writing.
Do you have the seller's contact information? Or
No,
what's,
you go through,
what's another
go
method
through-
you could do it?
go through the agent, right? The selling agent.
Okay, true. But what if the seller says, sure, I'll allow it to you, and then all of a sudden you go to do the inspection, and they change their mind? So what's a better way to do it?
Hmm.
You're right, you can do this, but what's the best way to do it?
They have to be in writing.
Get it in an addendum.
Get it, yeah, get it in
In your
contract.
offer, you just say, hey, buyer understands that their offer is not contingent upon due diligence. However, buyer reserves the right to do whatever inspection that they deem necessary at their sole discretion, and seller will agree to cooperate with the buyer. And the buyer and the seller, they accept that addendum. Great, now I've said, hey, this is no longer contingent upon the due diligence, but the buyer still retains their right to an inspection.
Is there a specific one for that or just the?
Is there a
plain one?
specific addenda?
Yeah,
No. So,
So in this case, is this kind of where my first situation comes in? It's like, hey, you can do an inspection now, but even because you waived it, sure, I'll let you come in and do an inspection, but you can't back out for what you find in inspection. Is that-
they don't have the right to cancel based on due diligence. It's very simple, because their offer does not make it contingent upon due diligence. They can have one, but it doesn't give them the ability to cancel based on due diligence. You see how, and this is a rhetorical question you got to ask amongst yourself. I ask people all the time, have you read the contract? And everyone always tells me yes. Now, they may have glanced at the contract, but they have never read the contract, because it's little things like this. And I'm not asking everybody to read it as much as I do, but the more you understand what you're asking your client to sign, the better you will be. Because it's not always if we have more understanding of what my buyer is going to have to be responsible for, and I have more knowledge of what the seller should have known than their agent, I've got a leg up on this, on the whole transaction. If the seller has not, if the listing agent has not protected their seller the way that I would protect the seller if I were them, and I represent the buyer, I'm in a pretty good seat because I'm aware of all this stuff. So we need to make sure that we take the time to read this. Now, again, if you have questions, that's what we're here. Come and ask us. We got to make sure that we understand what we're asking our clients to get themselves into. Okay? So that part's A. Part B. Oh, sorry. Part B is where it's talking about the right to cancel. If buyer determines, assuming that they did not waive the condition, we're going back to they kept the condition, in buyer's sole discretion that the results of the due diligence are unacceptable, buyer may either, no later than the due diligence deadline referenced in section 224B, cancel the REPC by providing written notice to the seller, whereupon the earnest money shall be released to the buyer without any further requirement, or no later than the deadline, resolve the issue with the seller. Buyer and seller come to an agreement before the deadline. Okay, so it said if we choose to cancel, it says the buyer must provide written notice to the seller. What is written notice?
Cancellation. Notice of cancellation.
Okay, notice of cancellation. All right. Is there any other form of written notice? Is an email written notice?
Yes.
Okay, I'm hearing a yes. I'll agree.
By definition, it's written. notice.
I'll agree. An email is written notice. Is a text message written notice?
The gray area.
No, I think it's pretty black and white.
It is written.
Is it written notice? An email, text message is written notice. That is black and white. Is a phone call written notice? A phone call is not written notice. Okay, so if I send an email or a text that my client has decided to cancel the transaction based on their due diligence, have I provided everything I need to in section B to cancel?
Yes, you did.
I did. Absolutely. So as my buyer, if I send a text, Aiden, if I send you a text, my buyer chooses to cancel based on section 8.1 of the contract, here's our written notice. Have we officially canceled per the contract?
Yep, you're done.
Okay. Now, first off, whoever this is, I appreciate you participating because I guarantee probably everyone else said the same thing. I set that up. The answer to that question is actually no, they have not canceled appropriately per the contract. They canceled, they provided the notice that is required under section 8.1B. All that asks for is a written notice. But the problem is, and we're going to jump down to section 18 of the contract, that I guarantee very few agents know this. And I'll throw myself into it. I was probably into it 10 years and didn't know this. I didn't understand the difference of this. So just because you might think I'm picking on everybody here, I've been doing this since 1994 and I've learned more and more and more. We've had several contracts throughout the years. So things have changed, but some things have remained the same. But the longer I've gotten better because I've read it more and I now understand the importance of stuff. Well, all these things still apply. Notices, section 18, except as provided in section 23, which is talking about acceptance. We'll get to that in a second. All notices required under the REPC must be A, in writing, which a text message and an email is. But this is the part that's different. B, signed by the party, by the buyer or seller giving the notice. A text message and an email does not have their signature. So that portion of a cancellation, which a cancellation is a notice, hence what we call it, the notice of cancellation. It's in writing. It requires a signature by that party giving notice, and it must be received by the buyer, seller, or their agent by the deadline. So we've got to deliver it to that other party. They've got to receive it by that deadline in order for that to be an effective communication. So I get this all the time. Agents, they send a text, they send an email, hey, sorry, things couldn't work out, but we're canceling. And then they give us lengthy explanation, which please don't do. The cancellation does not require that you must provide a reason why you are canceling. Your reason is per the contract, which is in that case is section 8.1. Don't say, well, my wife's dog tripped down on a rock and broke its leg, and we had to go. We just did. I throw up on the. It doesn't. Don't do any of that stuff. You're canceling based on 8.1. And if you use the cancellation form, it says, hey, are you canceling before your due diligence, or are you canceling after due diligence but before finance and appraisal? But you've got to provide written notice that is signed and received by the other party. Okay? I guarantee you're learning stuff today that you had no idea. And that was my promise at the very beginning of the class. Okay, 8.2, the appraisal condition. We're seeing this all the time. People are waiving the appraisal, but yet they're still getting a loan. And how does that work? Okay, we're not going to go into that issue, but I'm going to just cover this one thing. If you are canceling based on the appraisal, how do that cancel the buyer's notice of cancellation that we talked about? It gives you two boxes to check. It says you're canceling before the due diligence. That's box number 1. Or box number 2, it says you're canceling after due diligence, but before finance and appraisal. And then box number 3 is after, I forgot how it's phrased, but it's basically after those deadlines. So if I'm checking box number 2, which I would check, canceling after due diligence, but before finance and appraisal, how do we know if you're canceling based on the appraisal versus financing? Just by checking that box. There's one thing that you have to do. And the good news is what you have to do is in the contract. Buyer's right to cancel. If after completion of the appraisal by the licensed appraiser, buyer receives written notice from the lender, the appraiser, the property has appraised for less than the purchase price, which is the notice of appraised value, buyer may cancel the REPC by providing written notice to the seller with a copy of the notice of appraised value no later than the financing appraisal deadline. So if you're going to cancel based on the appraisal, you must include a copy of either the entire appraisal or the page that tells the value of the appraisal with your cancellation. And that's how you're going to prove that you're canceling based on the appraisal with your cancellation. And before I forget, if you guys are unaware, Tuesday mornings, myself, Matt Barton, or Ken Everett, we have a risk management, kind of a mastering agency contracts. We have a Zoom meeting that we discuss different things that occur. So every Tuesday at 9 a.m., 9 to 10, join that call, because this is where we are discussing the ongoing issues that are occurring and give you the opportunity to ask some questions. So so that is how you cancel based on the appraisal versus based on financing. Now you may be thinking, why does it matter? Well, it matters because you could be saving your clients some money. Under the financing section, 8.3, it asks, is this offer contingent upon financing or is it not? Very easy. Box number A, no financing is required. Cash offer, it's not going to matter. Okay, great. If you check this, then 8.3B does not apply. Well, if financing is required, well, then it's going to ask a couple of other questions. First part is going to talk about 8.3BI. This entire paragraph says, if you end up canceling the contract after the due diligence deadline, but you cancel it before the finance and appraisal deadline, then whatever dollar amount is in that field will be given to the seller. And you may be thinking, well, if I'm a buyer, why do I want to give any money to the seller? And if I'm representing the buyer, I don't want to give any money to the seller either. But do you want your offer accepted? Does your client want to put their offer better than any other offer so they can get their offer accepted? So if I'm the listing agent, I'm here to tell you that unless your offer is giving up all their earnest money or a good chunk of their earnest money at acceptance, at a minimum, I'm going to expect money be in this area. Because why this portion was, this is what this section was added into this contract when they made the changes a few years ago. And it's a great change. I'm glad they did it. Because without this language here, what was happening, our old contract, it didn't have this. And what it did is our old contracts gave the buyer the ability to cancel for a reason that might be considered a due diligence reason, but in reality, they're canceling after their due diligence deadline. And it's because it's sole discretion, because it's very difficult to prove. And again, our job is to avoid going to court. So what they did is they simplified things. They basically just said to avoid having if a buyer still cancels after the due diligence, we as the listing agent or the seller believe that they're canceling based on due diligence, we know we can't prove it. And let me give you an example. Let's say that we're negotiating to have carpet installed and it's $3,000. They go back and forth, whatever reason, buyer and seller don't come to an agreement on due diligence, and the deadline passes, and the next day the buyer cancels the contract based on financing. Well, but all the communication was they're canceling because they didn't come to an agreement on the carpet install. So the seller says, wait a minute, no, you didn't cancel based on financing. I've even got you even gave us an approval letter from your lender. And so you didn't cancel based on financing. You're canceling based on a due diligence reason, and that is already passed. Okay. Well, let's go back into the contract again. And again, I'm not an attorney, but this is the way that I would look at it. If we go to section 8.3 BI, buyer's right to cancel before the finance and appraisal deadline. If buyer in buyer's sole discretion is not satisfied with the terms and conditions of the loan, it doesn't say that if they're not qualified for the loan. It says if they're not okay with the terms and conditions at their sole discretion. I don't know about you, but could I say, hey, you know what? I know the interest rates are 2.5%, 2 3/4, but quite frankly, I was expecting it to get to 1.5%. And they're not at 1.5. I'm not okay with the terms of the loan. I'm canceling. It's at my sole discretion, not the buyer's, not the seller, not the seller's sole discretion. So even though I'm qualified for the loan, I don't like the terms. So could I also state, well, because again, I'm not trying to create an excuse for buyers to get out of contracts. I just know what's happening. Could I make the argument, well, because I now have to buy carpet, now that's $3,000 less that I can put on as my down payment that I wanted to put. And now I have to pay 10 cents more a month on my mortgage payment. And I'm not okay with that. I wanted my mortgage payment to be $1,500. Now it's $1,510. I'm not okay with the terms, so therefore I'm canceling based on financing. Now, we're not going to go into that type of depth when we're providing a reason, but did I show did I give an idea that because of the carpet issue, it's now affected my financing terms? The answer is yes. This isn't a court of law. We're not here to judge if that stands up or not. The point is, it would be very difficult to prove otherwise because of that word sole discretion. So because they included this piece, it says, hey, okay, fine. If you're going to cancel after due diligence, then whatever money is here, automatically it's going to go to the seller if you cancel based on financing. Now, if you're the listing agent and you get an offer that has 0 here, and I guarantee if you've had listings, you're seeing this and you didn't understand what this paragraph did, and you're putting your seller under contract where it has 0 here. Unless you've got all their earnest money non-refundable upon acceptance, you are not representing your seller, in my opinion. So if it's a $10,000 earnest money and I don't have any non-refundable upfront or whatever, at a minimum, I'm going to put $5,000 here. I want half the earnest money. So now they've done their due diligence. They've passed the due diligence. Now we just want to check their financing is in order. But if they cancel after due diligence, $5,000 is going to my seller. Okay? Hopefully you understand that. Getting that light. 11:37. Okay. All right. The last part of this contract, we are going to be going through pretty quickly. Okay. Paragraph 9. Addenda. When you make an offer, and let's just say your offer includes 2 addenda. Well, I don't want to confuse anymore. Let's just say it includes 1 addendum. So it's the REPC plus, say, the FHA addendum. So you're going to check the box that there are, and it's the FHA addendum is included. And let's say that the seller is okay with everything in the REPC. They're okay with the purchase price. They're okay with everything that's been spelled out. But in the FHA addendum, it also asks the seller to contribute closing costs. And let's say that the buyer asked the seller to pay $5,000 in closing costs. So you represent the buyer, or the buyer's offer is $400. Everything else in the REPC portion, the seller agrees to, but the seller does not agree to paying the closing costs. If I represent the seller, so we're gonna counter the offer. How do I counter the offer? Okay, what?
With the counter offer.
Within a counter offer, I know, but I want you to walk through it. So you first have the REPC. What am I doing with the REPC? Remember, I'm okay with the terms of the REPC.
You agree to.
Do I accept, counter, or reject the REPC portion?
You counter the whole thing, the REPC and you did.
Okay, so what was said is you counter the whole thing. Do we have agreement on that, or is it something else? Please speak up. Okay. Well, that is
So-
correct. Remember, the addendum is part of the offer. That is the entire offer. So many times I'll see people, because they're okay with the terms of the REPC, they accept the REPC, but they counter the FHA addendum. And that is incorrect. You either accept the entire offer, you counter the entire offer, or you're rejecting the entire offer. It's not bits and pieces. Think of it this way on the REPC. If you are going to counter it, if you are okay with what's on page 2, do you accept, or do you counter pages 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6 and counter only page 2, or do you counter the entire offer? You counter the entire REPC. Same thing here. Whatever addenda is part of your offer, you're countering, accepting, or rejecting the entire thing. Okay, hopefully that makes sense.
What does that look like specifically? Because then you put your counter and you leave the REPC one just as it is, and then you just type in your, I guess, your new terms in that addendum counter.
You say here, you're gonna say counter addendum number 2.
Okay.
And then on addendum number 1, you're gonna have the same thing, a counter addendum number 2. And addendum number 2 only addresses the thing that you're not in agreement of. Everything else you would be in agreement of. Okay? Okay, now we're gonna have to blow through this very quickly. Section 10. This is the part that talks about the buyer's aware they're buying as is home. I love the fact that sellers want to counter, or buyers want a home to be purchased in as is condition. They write that on an addendum. Well, just here to tell you, the contract already states that. So you can write it again, but it already states that. The buyer is aware they're buying a home that's in as is condition. Okay. In 10.3, even though it's an as is, the seller has an obligation to disclose information about the home. If the seller has knowledge about a property, they have an obligation, especially if it's a material fact that must be disclosed. And if the seller is choosing not to disclose it, but we now have knowledge of it, hey, Aiden, the reason why I'm selling right now, we're having a lot of hot weather. I'm here to tell you, when it rains, the roof leaks. So we have got to get this home sold quickly because I want to make sure that we get this closed before the next rainstorm that we have. So, because I don't want to disclose that. I don't want to worry about fixing the roof. So make sure that we're doing that. And you have a fiduciary duty.
You're the
I know.
seller, right?
I'm the listing agent. Oh, yes, I'm the seller. You're the listing agent, yes. And I did some research. I understand what fiduciary is. Fiduciary says that you have a obligation of confidentiality. And I'm telling you right now, I don't want that to be disclosed. If you're in that situation, what does he do?
I would say you didn't read the fiduciary duty all the way, because after that, there's a legal obligation for me to disclose.
Okay. Fiduciary only applies to lawful requests. That is an unlawful request, so therefore the fiduciary does not cover that. If you now have knowledge of a material fact and the seller is unwilling to disclose it, you have an obligation that it has to be disclosed, and you tell the client that. Aiden, I'm sorry you feel that way, but when we signed the contract, it made it very clear that I do have a fiduciary duty. Just like you have a duty to disclose. And if you've now made me aware of this, I am obligated legally to disclose that.
Just
So
bring it back to your fiduciary, like, look, I have to disclose it because I'm taking care of you.
I'm taking care-
I don't want to
absolutely.
see a lawsuit come.
sometimes my duty requires you to protect you, and sometimes protecting you requires to protect you from yourself. And that's this case, absolutely. So they have a duty to disclose what's there. So I use this example real quick. Let's say that there's a big gaping hole in a house, but it's covered up with a rug and a table that's over the floor. Does the seller have to disclose that gaping hole?
Yes.
If it's not, the key part about it is if it's readily available by an average individual to see it. Well, if there's a gaping hole under a carpet and the table's on it, it's not readily available to disclose. Seller's gonna have to disclose that. But now you take the carpet and the table away, you walk in and there's tape around it, caution, hole in the ground. And to go view the property, you're having to walk around the hole. Do they need to disclose there's a hole in the wall? Probably not in that situation, or a hole in the floor. Probably not, because it is visible. The picture's on the MLS. Hey, there's this. It's so if it's readily available, because there's things that we just naturally think about. Oh, I totally forgot about this, totally forgot about that, but it's totally available by a common average person.
Gray area though too, right? Or like an arguable area.
I mean,
technically.
you're
Unless there's a
always
picture.
better to disclose. Don't get me wrong. Disclose will always be better than failing to disclose. But we're talking about, because people try to say that the seller they knowingly failed to disclose. It was intentional. Really? How do you know that? You gotta prove that it was intentional. Okay? Go through. Okay, section 16, default. That's what I talked about, the default remedy. Both the default for the buyer and the seller, the remedies are the same. They're just in reverse order. So we talked about it on the example where the buyer failed to deposit earnest money in time. Well, the buyer technically is in default. So the seller, you come down to the seller, or sorry, if buyer's in default, the seller may elect one of the following. A, retain the earnest money that's been deposited as the remedy. B, go to perform specific performance. So basically perform on the contract. Or C, the earnest money is returned to the buyer, and then you pursue whatever remedies of law. And then the same remedies apply to the buyer if the seller's in default. If the buyer is able to get their earnest money back, and then the seller would owe the equivalent of the earnest money. I often hear that the remedy in that case is the buyer gets twice the earnest money. Well, no, it's not twice the earnest money. They're getting their earnest money back, and the seller owes equivalent of the earnest money. Then the buyer can go to court, sue to have the contract upheld. The court can force the seller to sell the house, and any other damages as the third option. In addition to it, the seller, the defaulting party, could be responsible for attorney's fees as well. So that's why we want to avoid any type of legal scenario, or avoid our client from ever getting in default whenever we can. Obviously, if it's our client's choice, that's on them. But we need to do our part to make sure that we avoid that from happening. Okay. Section 21, we were talking, time is of the essence. We talked about by default, the contract already has a time in place. And the default of it is 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And so unless you specify, which you can say an addenda, or the party has by 10 p.m. tonight to accept or reject it, or counter this request. And if you put a time in it, well, then that's going to override the time that's in default of the contract. But if they just put a day or a date, then that 5 p.m. is the deadline. Okay. The last two parts we'll talk about is 23 and 24. Okay. Section 23, acceptance. Understanding when acceptance occurs requires when two things have happened, not just one, but two. Seller and buyer have signed the offer or counteroffer where noted, and it's been communicated to the other party or their agent. Okay, not one or the other, both have to happen in order for acceptance to occur. So why I bring this up, because it happens all the time. And I was in a transaction where my buyer, this is exactly what happened. A buyer of ours, and I had a text message that says, hey, our clients have accepted, my seller accepted the offer. Great. I'm not around. I'll get the offer to you as soon as I can. Okay, great. Well, the next day comes by. They said they're going to give it to me either that night or in the morning the next day. Well, the afternoon of the next day, I still don't have it. And I've reached out to the seller, listing agent, and crickets. I've been around the business long enough that usually there's something the matter. Well, sure enough, around 1 or 2 o'clock, I get a response from the listing agent. Hey, sorry, my clients did receive another offer, and now they decided that they want to look at multiple offers. So they're asking everybody to submit their highest and best offer. And I responded back, I'm like, that's actually not correct. You made it very clear that your client accepted the offer. Here's your text. So one of two things either happened. Either you communicated that it was accepted when in reality it wasn't, which is in essence fraud. Now it was unintentional or intentional, whatever. Or your client did accept it and now they're retracting what they stated and they're taking it back because I didn't have a copy of the offer to prove anything. Either way, that was a problem. And at first my client wanted to pursue this, and we got their broker involved, and they realized they were in a tough position. And finally my client decided to just back away, and the seller, I think, maybe compensated him a little bit. I can't remember, to just go away, but my client was willing to just back off on it. But if they didn't, that was a pretty good position to claim that, hey, if we may not officially been under contract with the seller, well, the agent was the one that was in trouble because they are the ones that communicated, did something that would have been against what their licensure would have been issued. So my guess is what would have happened. My client would not have had a legal issue with the seller. My client almost wanted to write a complaint, chose not to, with the division, and the agent would have been given a violation of doing that. So if we have that situation where, hey, yes, our client has said that they're going to sign it, but they just haven't done it yet. They're not home or they're not able to do it. But they've given you the authorization to communicate it. Hey, Aiden, just want you to know, my clients have verbally accepted your offer. And once they've signed it and given me a copy, I'll get you a copy as soon as it's there. But as far as right now, they're verbally agreeing to it. And we all know that a verbal agreement is not binding. So they could easily change their mind, but if they do, that's up to them. If they don't, we have to, it is what it is.
I mean, even on your example, wouldn't the other agent be still safe technically based on section 23? Like, yeah, it was messed up for sure, and like he shouldn't have done that, but acceptance only occurs when all of the following have occurred. Seller and buyer have signed it. And so sure, he told you you're under contract, but nothing was signed. Like,
That's
I mean,
what I'm
by
saying.
definition,
Between buyer and seller, there wasn't a contract that was
Yeah.
there. But the agent, they would have received a violation because they did something that it would at minimum be an ethics violation. I believe it would have been both ethics and a division violation, is where I'm getting at. So I'm just trying to say, don't fall into the same trap. If you're saying something's accepted, then you better make sure it's been signed and accepted. Otherwise, just say, hey, verbally, we have an obligation to convey the truth. Okay. Now, if he would have come back and said, I did send that, my client said that they signed it, but it turns out they didn't sign it. The agent didn't do anything wrong in that way, if that's what actually happened. Now, in that case, then if there was something in writing, whatever communicated from their client would imply it, that's a different scenario. Okay, the last part, section 24, people often tell me what dates should they put in here. And I'm here to say nothing is set in stone. There isn't only one perfect way, but what we see often is a timeline between 3 to 5 days after acceptance of a seller disclosure deadline. 5 is probably a little long. 3 to 4 is probably more realistic. And keep in mind, in today's market, these dates are shorter and shorter and shorter. I'm talking about a normal market, not a crazy market with what's going on. Due diligence, 14 days, so 2 weeks, pretty normal. Finance and appraisal deadline, I'd say about 21 to 24 days is pretty standard. And then settlement, 30 days. Now, unless you're getting like a USDA or some other loans that typically take a little more time, you may need to ask for a little bit more time. Or if your lender is having, I know sometimes they have problems with appraisals being done. So those deadlines, the finance and appraisal and the settlement deadline, what I would always do is ask the lender, hey, don't tell me a number just to get my business. Tell me how much time you think it's going to take. How much time do you need for the finance and appraisal deadline? How much time do you need for settlement? Great. Now, if it's a lender you're working with and they're always off, their deadlines are always short, well, I'd have a talk with your lender and ask them the question, is this normal for you? Tell me why you keep telling me something and you're not able to meet the standard. I want to continue to work with you, but I've asked you to be honest with me. And if they can't do that, well, then maybe you got to consider somebody else. Okay, I know certain things we went into a lot, others we just didn't even touch at all because we're already out of time. But hopefully, I'm pretty sure you picked up on stuff that you may not have had any idea of. So please also put in the notes section that just type in there, yes, we were here for the whole thing. That way Russ can get your credit for everything. So unless there's some questions, thank you, but we are now done. All right, guys. So. Oh, man,
Sorry, will you go over those dates just one more time? The normal, how long you give?
yeah, so seller disclosure deadline between 3 to 4 days after acceptance. Due diligence, typically about 14 days. Finance and appraisal, 21 to 24 days after. And then settlement deadline would be 30 days.
Thank you.
You bet.
Are the rest of these classes also going to be until noon?
All of these classes that are Tuesdays and Thursdays, they're typically from 10 to noon.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
You bet.